I'd like to put three 21st century megatrends on the table within which we all have to think and behave because they are beyond our control. The first one comes out of a conversation with a young demographer, but who's professional, who gave me a statement the other day that I haven't verified, that of all the people who've ever lived beyond the age of 65 since the beginning of mankind, over 50% are alive today. And then he backed it up with an amazing statistic that in 1900, the average lifespan of an American and a Brit was 40. And that more than doubled in 100 years to 83. And he said basically the human species has gone through a complete change from being a relatively short-lived species for most of its existence to actually now being much longer lived. And of course, this, I feel, is responsible for many of the world's problems, from the US budget deficit, because now all the baby boomers are geriatric boomers. It's probably going to lead to a flat economy in Europe and Japan because they're both aging demographically. So, you know, there are huge consequences which the world is facing, and particularly in terms of how much social welfare, Medicare, Medicaid can you actually provide as a government, given that the population is aging. The second megatrend comes from a conversation that I had with the head of scenario planning at US Homeland Security, and this was in 2012, a young woman who's incredibly bright. And I said, I haven't got the opportunity often to ask people what they consider the threats to the US are, but you're well placed. So I said, what are the main threats? And she gave me two. The first, which was predictable, it was self-radicalization. In other words, people in the US turning from religious zealots or nutcases into killers overnight. And as she said, there are no flags, Clem, to that happening, and we're worried every single day of another incident. And of course, this was before the Boston Marathon bombings. But it was the second threat that she gave me which nearly made me fall off my seat. She said it's climate change. They now regard that as a national security threat in the US. And she said that it's the increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. Now, this was before 2013, when in January, Australia had record temperatures around Alice Springs. It hit 54.5 degrees centigrade. They've actually got a new color called deep purple for any place that is registering over 50 degrees centigrade. They've had these bushfires around Sydney, which have been terrible because the bush is drier, the winds are stronger. We've had terrible flooding in Europe. But in America, we've had twisters in the middle of the year, which have taken out half of cities in Oklahoma. And just now, we've had Illinois, where a city called Washington was half taken out. As she said, if any foreign enemy did that kind of destruction to the US would have gone on to a total war footing. And it's because it's nature that they haven't. But it does mean that 2015, when the next round of global climate change discussions takes place, I think the mood is going to be completely different after the kind of year we've had. And then the third megatrend is something that affects our national security. It's the changing nature of work. The fact that when I was young, you just got a decent A-levels or matric and then a degree, and then you waved your CV, you got a job. Now, that has completely changed for young people because technology has driven a huge spike through many jobs that existed 50 years ago. But secondly, companies have changed their employment model and now only hire people for core activities. Everything else is subcontracted. It means youth unemployment is reaching record highs around the world. We all know in South Africa, 18 to 24, it's 50%. But in Spain, it's 52%. In Greece, it's 58%. In Britain, it's a record 21%. Only Germany is sitting at 7%. And with a high youth unemployment rate, you run a national security risk because of what's happened in places like Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, which all had high youth unemployment rates. You have, obviously, what's happened in Turkey and in Brazil. And it means that we have to think very carefully how we're going to reduce youth unemployment in this country, because nowadays, young people don't get a job, they have to create a job. And the skills required to create a job are totally different. Our schools are still teaching kids for the job market of the 1950s. They haven't adapted like foxes to the job market of today. And for me, that is a huge megatrend which is happening everywhere in the world. And we've got to address this issue in a much more creative manner than we have done already, since youth unemployment could also lead to an Arab-type spring in South Africa.